Fred, how are you? Thank you for being here.
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have you on. As you know, based on previous conversations and emails, I am like the number one Archer and Armstrong fan of your run, and so it is a big. It is very cool that I even got to talk to you once before. It's very cool that I get to talk to you again, because people on my page know I've been very outspoken about how much I love Archer and Armstrong. So I want to just establish a base for the people who obviously didn't get to hear the first conversation, outside of you and me. So what was your first comic as a writer? So we can go like your first big two comic,
So you
which,
mean
if I am correct, was Malibu, was your first professional writing
yes,
gig.
yes. And I had it. They had been bought by Marvel by that point. Prime was the name of the comic, and so I did get a check with Spider-Man on it, which is very exciting.
Which, so weirdly enough, when I was thinking back to that story a couple days ago, I couldn't remember if it had Spider-Man on it or Mickey Mouse on it, but I was like, that definitely was before Disney
Well,
bought Marvel.
oh
That
yeah,
doesn't make any sense.
Disney didn't buy Marvel until I want to say like 2011, 2010, something like that, and then it actually took. Well, by that point, everybody's paid by direct deposit, right? But for some
Yeah,
reason,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like I was working for both Disney Games and Marvel, and so like at one point the Marvel and Disney accounting departments merged
Mm.
and like got confused, and so I ended up starting getting paper checks that do have Mickey Mouse on. But that was
Oh, so
relative.
both. I was right, just at the wrong time
Oh
frame.
yeah, it just now they have Mickey Mouse on them.
That's
Well,
interesting. I actually didn't know that you wrote for Disney Games.
yep,
What
I
did you
did.
work on?
So we worked on a bunch of stuff. At one point, Disney had the idea to do a bunch do like an MCU of games, have all the games interconnect. But after a couple of years, it became obvious to them just from the way that games are made that idea was insane.
Yeah.
Uh, and I came out with a game. It was called I want to say it was called the Avengers Initiative. It was a iPad game. It was a tablet
Interesting.
game with Hulk and Captain America. We were gonna do more, but those are the only like segments that got released. So it was a mobile game, but primarily for tablets. It's it
Interesting.
it was a ripoff of there was a sword fighting game on the tablet. It was very big, and I cannot remember what it was called.
Was it like Fruit Ninja? Where
No,
you
it
like
was
slice?
it was like a very serious, like grim dark.
Oh, Infinity Blade?
It was Infinity Blade. Yeah.
Yeah. I played the hell out of that when I was in high school. Both
Yeah,
of
I mean
them.
it was fun. It was fun, but then it was the Hulk, but it was Infinity Blade, so you're punching instead of slashing.
Gotcha.
Get
Gotcha.
fights. The most famous game to come out of that bunch was Alex Irvine wrote a game for The Facebook game was super popular. It was huge. It
I
was
vaguely remember playing that actually.
I cannot remember what it was called. Something Avengers something. I forgot.
Yeah. I think they were trying to push the Avengers campus around that time.
This is
And
way
that
before
might have
this.
been something like that.
Way before
Really?
that.
No, 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 not the Disney thing. But like Avengers Campus was a thing before that. Because I think it was around the time of like um Age of Ultron, or maybe a little bit before
This would
that
have been after
when.
Age of Ultron. I think had already come out by
Yeah, so then Age of Ultron, they would have already had their like Avengers Initiative camp or like compound.
then. Right. Anyway, I don't
I don't know.
remember.
Maybe I don't know what
Very
I'm talking about. I'm thinking of something else. Who knows?
It was very successful, and I cannot remember what it was called. I'm pretty sure my game was called Avengers Initiative, and only the Hulk and Cap. We were gonna do Hulk and Cap, and I assumed Thor, but only those first two came out. You know, video games like Hollywood, you end up working on a bunch of projects that never see the light of day, but you get paid really well. So
Yeah, I was talking to I did an interview with Tim Seeley a couple months ago, last year at some point, and he was saying that he got paid to write so many scripts that never saw the light of
yeah,
day.
I'm not as lucky.
Luckily, his revival, which is right here, the first issue, finally is being turned into a sci-fi show, and finally is getting off the
Cool.
ground. So that's like interesting. I guess that's one in the million when something finally actually continues. So your first book, your first professional book was called Prime from Malibu
Yes,
Comics.
right.
And then what was your first Valiant title that you did? Was it Archer and Armstrong?
Was Archer and Armstrong? Yeah. In fact, they approached me about doing it at New York Comic Con. I want to say in like 2011, and they asked me based on a book I'd done with Greg Pak called Incredible Hercules. It
Mm.
was about Hercules and
Yeah, the
Egypt.
Incredible Herc. Yeah, that was a good era.
Yeah, and so ironically, Tom Brevoort, who's been an editor at Marvel forever, told me after the fact that part of the reason they greenlit Incredible Hercules in the first place uh, was that they were like, oh yeah, it'll be like Archer and Armstrong, which was a book. Actually, obviously, it was a Barry Windsor Smith book in the '90s, and I'd never heard of Archer and Armstrong. So when
Yeah.
they asked me to do Archer and Armstrong, I was like, sure, and then went home and Googled it, and I'm like, okay, this sounds nuts. I'm totally into this. Um, but then, as it turns out, uh, there was this behind the scenes thing with Incredible Hercules that I had no knowledge of whatsoever.
And I know that if you can tackle Archer and Armstrong and like Hercules and history, you're set because there's so much you can do with it. I actually had the thought of uh I would like love a Secret of Monkey Island old school point and click adventure with Archer and Armstrong. I feel like that would be so mint. You could work on that
That would be great. I'm
at
loving
some
the
point.
loving the new. It's much more advanced than point. Like I'm loving the new Indiana Jones Xbox game. Is fantastic.
Yeah, I have a PlayStation, so I haven't been able to get it yet, but I'm very much anxiously awaiting when it comes out. I
Yes,
love Indiana Jones, which is one of the reasons I love Archer and Armstrong. It's one of my favorite series of all time. Globe-trotting adventure, cabals of people that are controlling everything.
right.
What's not to love, right? It crosses over with all, in my opinion, some of the most interesting parts of the Valiant universe. You see all of, you get all of the 1%, Project Rising Spirit, the Null. You have all these people, right, that you
Right.
can you can interact with and all these cast of characters that are specific to Archer and Armstrong, but then you also have like Eternal Warrior and the Geomancers, and then you
Right.
have Ivar, right, and the Time Stream, and then you have Bloodshot, and then you have Ninjak, and you have all these people that can come in and out, and it's so modular that it gets to tell something very interesting. And I think that is just as rad can be. And when you started writing it, so I remember us talking about this, but you might be able to reflect my recollection. Didn't your initial pitch for Archer and Armstrong got shot down, right?
More or less. I
Could
would
you
say
go
about
into that, tell that
I would say
story?
about 40% of was what the in the original pitch, maybe a little bit more than that, wound up in the series. Like the original idea, it's not really explained. Barry Windsor Smith never. So you read the Barry Windsor Smith books, and I've read a lot of Barry Windsor Smith books, and I think these might be my favorites because they're so banana pants. It didn't make a huge amount of sense. So I'm too logical. Like I have to like impose sense on things. So like they don't really. He never really explained why the sect, which is this essentially this sort of uber conspiracy. Which I think I've more made it into like uber conspiracy. It's like the Council of Conspiracies, like the Illuminati and the Opus Dei and the Gnomes of Xeric and all your favorites are all, it's like the Legion of Doom of conspiracies, right? He never Barry Smith never really explained why the sect was after Armstrong, and so I ended the original idea was that the reason the sect, which is made up of all the major world religions, is after Archer Armstrong is because he knows that all of their stories are suspect. Like he was there, when Muhammad was in the cave, when Jesus was buried, when Moses was leading people out of Egypt. And he knows that a lot of what gets passed down as the truth, as divine truth, is BS. He knows what bodies are buried, right? And the religions hate this because they don't want anybody around to say that. And so I think the general thought was that was probably too controversial for what was essentially a mainstream comic book, and I think they were right. But
Yeah, especially for a launching point at that point in
especially for
time, right? Like you're not established in this continuity yet to be able to throw that at your readers.
yeah, and then also in the original Barry Windsor Smith. I kind of basically just remade the first issue of the Barry Windsor Smith comic in my original pitch because it was so crazy. I'm like, I don't even know how to wrap my brain around this. I was like, people like this. Maybe I'll just do this. And it was Warren Simons, my editor, who came up with the idea that because originally what happens in the Barry Windsor Smith comic is that Archer is raised by these crazy fundamentalists who he discovers are child molesters. Um, and they try to murder him when he discovers their like rape camp. They're running out of their compound. It's very dark. If anything, my
It's
version
very
of Archer
Preacher
Armstrong.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think it predates Preacher by several years.
Oh, yes, it does. But it's interesting to see that through line.
Yeah.
'Cause you don't
So if
necessarily associate Barry Windsor Smith with Garth Ennis at all, or that same line
right.
of thinking.
Well, I mean, so if anything, my Armstrong ended up being like way less controversial than I originally intended, but my Archer was way less controversial than the art. Even I was like, this is a little much for me. So the Archer's parents in my version are still Christian, fundamentalists, and in the original Barry Windsor Smith, Archer Armstrong, he goes to Tibet and trains into martial arts and uh, he becomes like a Hare Krishna kung fu guy, and I'm
Hence
like,
the rat tail.
yeah, and he's got the robe on and everything. Like I don't know that Barry Windsor Smith knew anything about being a Hare Krishna beyond what he'd seen in an airplane. Um,
Yeah.
and neither do I. Like, but I was raised a Christian, so I can make fun of Christians. I was not raised Hare Krishna. I don't really know anything about it. But I still had him getting sent to the monastery. But Lauren said, "Well, wouldn't it be more?" He's like, "There's too many steps to this. Why not have him just grow up in America and have him send him after Armstrong?" And so it was really more his idea to just kind of leave out the Himalayas stuff. And so in my version of the story, what ends up happening is Armstrong and his brothers, Eternal Warrior and Time Walker, are from this Mesopotamian sort of world, and they end up finding this like Kirby tech device that of mysterious origin that ends up granting immortality, but it blows up when it grants you immortality, and so the sect is now after Armstrong to because he hid all the parts of the immortality machine, so nobody else could use it, and so that's why they're after him. Is they're trying to reassemble the boon, as it's
The
called.
Boon, which I love also because it's very similar to the Monolith from 2001, and
Sure.
as you said, the Kirby tech, like it harkens to a fantastic era of sci-fi, bringing
Yeah.
it into an ancient civilization. And what
Yeah.
is cooler than ancient alien stuff? There's nothing cooler.
I should definitely shout out Clayton Henry designed the boon and all the Earth stuff and Mary Maria and all the other like anything that wasn't Archer and Armstrong were designed by David Aja. Um, he just crushed it.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I've been on the record to say Archer and Armstrong is tight, and it is from front to back in every aspect, every step. It's excellence. Everybody understood the assignment, and everybody did such a great job on it.
It truly.
Um, I think Archer and Armstrong is one of those things that you can look at and you can reread, and every single bit of it is interesting the second time over as well. Because there's also all these little jokes that you kind of miss the first time. And I think one of my favorite jokes, you brought up the Himalayas, is when they actually do go to Tibet in the Himalayas, you find out that the monks aren't like Buddhist monks, they are Nazis
Right.
and idolize Hitler, and because that's where they escaped, and like that's just such a kind of outlandish South
Yeah.
Parkian joke to make, but it's
Well,
so funny. It's so
it
good.
it is and it isn't just because there is a tiny little bit of truth in the sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark idea that the Nazis were obsessed with archaeology and
Yeah,
artifacts and all
yeah.
this stuff. Um, Primarily, what they were doing was there was this racist theory in the late 19th century, early 20th century that white people are descended from Atlantis. Okay, just try and follow this, and
Okay.
made their way from the Indian. So the Indian Ocean is where Atlantis supposedly is, even though its name is Atlantis, like the Atlantic Ocean. So
Yeah.
uh, this is all BS anyway. So they all trumped across India. The term Aryan, if you've heard white people refer to as Aryan, that comes from Indian. That's
Yep.
an Indian anthropological term. And they tromp through the Himalayas. So there was this SS expedition sent to Tibet trying to find evidence of Atlantean white people wandering from India to Europe. Shockingly, they didn't find anything, but there are all these like photos of the SS kind of hanging out
Yeah.
there, and
They're looking
also
for the Atlantean Donner Party,
yes,
essentially. I
well
mean,
put, yes, exactly. and also the swastika, the cricket cross, is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a big part of Hindu and Tibetan symbolism.
Yeah, which to clarify for viewers, was co-opted by the Nazis. Not that
Correct.
Hinduism is Nazism at all.
Correct.
So you did Archer and Armstrong, and that was your first foray into Valiant Comics. Where did you go from there? Because I know that you took a break from Valiant. It wasn't like you were on Valiant for years and years and years and years past that. Like you never left. Um, what did you do after Valiant, after Archer and Armstrong for Valiant? Was the next thing you did Resurgence?
No, I mean, I did Ivar Time Walker, which was very well received, and that's probably actually my favorite Valiant book I did. That was I can't remember if that was coming out. I think it started coming out right after Archer Armstrong ended. I did a book set in the Rye 4001 AD era called War Mother. I did a book called Generation Zero, which was about the kids.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot about Generation Zero. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that more later though, because that's relevant later on.
And then the regime changed over there, and I kind of ended up doing other things. And then I came back to do Lords in 2018, and that was a lot of fun. And then there was another regime change, and the pandemic happened, and now I'm back doing, and I've done a Resurgence and a bunch of related titles for that.
Resurgence in general was such a fantastic period, an event, and I think it was really interesting to see all these characters come together. I also think it was interesting to see who took whose side, but there is one notable omission that
Okay,
I
I believe
have
a couple, but you're going to focus on one. Okay,
one specifically. The people on the Valiant subreddit were up in arms when this was the case.
okay.
Where was Pete Stanchek? Why was he not a central figure, as
So that
powerful as he is?
yes, that is a great question that I have no answer for. I was given a list of characters involved in the event. As you may know, I was not the first writer on the event.
Yeah, it was AJ
But
Ampadu, right?
no, it was Becky Cloonan
Oh,
and
that's right.
Conrad who
Yes.
were writing
Yes.
XO. And so they wrote a significant chunk of the first issue. I came in and kind of did bits and pieces, and then I wrote the rest of the series. Um, so that was a decision that was made. I wouldn't necessarily say it was like above my pay grade, but it was definitely a decision was made before I came on board. So I have no answer for you, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
I wish I could tell you that. Oh yes, of course. I mean, not that I'm trying to suck up to the subreddit part, but in all seriousness, if I had been in charge, then Pete would have actually been in there. But
Yeah. One of the reasons they brought that up was just that he is so powerful. He
right,
is so important. Like he's such a central figure to a lot of storylines that they were just wondering where is he? Why
yeah,
isn't he
no,
there? So I guess I have
I
to reach out to Becky Cloonan and get her on the pod because I need to get
maybe,
answers, you know?
yeah, I don't know if she'll write you back.
Fair enough.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, I have no answer. And it would be interesting to sort of consider which side Peter would end up taking, since he's kind of got that anti-authoritarian streak. But
How would you have written him if he was in there?
that's a good question because whichever side gets him is so the whole thing is just so ridiculously balanced in their favor. That's why I would have him figure out I would have him join Silk, quite frankly, because then it's a more interesting story. Because then he's essentially on the bad guy's side, and so
Yeah.
then that causes everybody to, the Silk side was Eternal Warrior and Roku and a bunch of people with kind of like interesting power sets, and then also the decision was made before I came on board to send EXO off into space, which is not a decision I would have made. And so, but actually, so if
Yeah.
you EXO and EXO against Stanchek would be kind of interesting.
That would be really interesting. But he's got to find Divinity, right? Divinity's the wild card. You got to find
Yes,
him. So
that
it
yes,
makes some semblance of sense. But yeah, it probably isn't a decision I would have made either. I
yeah,
think him being on the front line because he wouldn't want to be the scout team, right? He is the only one who can do it. But that's not Arik. Like
that's true.
Arik is he wants to be in the fight.
That's true. That's true. And so yeah, but then I don't know that we would have gotten Divinity in there if we hadn't
It's
had
true.
EXO go out trying to find him, and if we didn't have, then we probably wouldn't have the Psylords in there, which I
Yeah.
thought was
Divinity
kind
being
of
notoriously like underutilized in recent
yeah,
years, like never anywhere. Which is upsetting because Divinity is really cool. He's like Dr. Manhattan, but for Valiant.
sure, yeah.
And
He's
so
the star.
Yeah, he's so yeah, that's true. That's a really good
I mean, that's
that's
why it was
the perfect analogy. That's why
so
he was
fun.
created. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was tons of fun. Those big events are always like a bear. I did it a little bit before when I did the Dynamite books for Dynamite, the zombie books that had all the different characters in it. So that was
But you also wrote for
hard.
Marvel Zombies,
Mm-hmm.
which,
Yep.
so not being the person who like heads Marvel Zombies, that big kind of event, like
Well, yeah,
era,
yeah.
do you feel like did you have similar constraints as being like the guy, or is it just kind of like, oh, I get to write my whatever story and someone gives me notes that I can't do something if it's necessary?
Well, the when I came on board, it was Marvel Zombies 3, and at this point was when we were talking earlier about the transition between Disney talking about it and then actually buying Marvel. Is the Marvel books, the Marvel Zombie books sell like hotcakes. In fact, Marvel Zombies 3 remains to this day my highest selling comic. Uh, but the brass was worried about anything freaking out mainstream America or the Disney shareholders or anything like that. So when I got a hold of the property, they're like, you can't use any movie characters, no Spider-Man, no
Hmm.
Wolverine, no Fantastic Four, no X-Men, that kind of stuff. So
That's
I'm
so
at
whack. Like they didn't even have the rights for all of that for the movies, but they had them for the characters. Like it's kind of dumb you couldn't use them.
Yeah, I think all of those characters were sold off by that point. Sony had Spider-Man and Fox had X-Men, so they were all spoken for, and the movies had been made about them. But like, they were just like, and I don't think that look, the Kirkman did a great job of making Marvel Zombies both a ridiculously high-selling comic, but very kind of like punk and rock and roll and very kind of
Yeah.
like out there. And so the suits did not like it at all. So I ended up coming up with a story with Machine Man. I thought who else, who better yet to send into the zombie universe, but this guy was a robot. But of course, people complain online like the Marvel Zombies virus even infects robots. Shut up.
That's nitpicky. That's so nitpicky.
Well, it's insane, is what it is. It doesn't make any sense. So it's like he's no circulatory system. This virus is not gonna. So, but what was funny was that because I really enjoyed the Warren Ellis. I just I love Machine Man. Period. I think the Kirby's first 7 or 8 issues is one of the best things he ever did. I think it's probably his best 70s series next to the Eternals. Um, and then I love Next Wave, which was the Warren Ellis Stuart Immonen comic that had him on the team. But unfortunately, Ralph Macchio, not the Karate Kid, but the editor of Marvel Zombies, because he was also the editor of the Marvel Ultimates line, which is where Marvel Zombies first appeared, was in Ultimate Fantastic Four. Fun trivia for your friends. Um, he flat out refused because he was the editor on that Kirby Machine Man book and worked with Steve Ditko when Steve Ditko uh, closed out that run, and he loves Machine Man and he hated Next Wave. So it was like you were not allowed to use Machine Man. So I had to I'm like, okay, I can't use Spider Man, I can't use Machine Man. What mans am I allowed to use? You've totally really kind of chopping my arms off here. So basically, I was able to convince Ralph that no, this is going to rehabilitate, because let's face it, Next Wave is great, but Warren Ellis basically writes Machine Man like he's Bender from Futurama. He's just this obnoxious drunk.
Yeah.
So I get both sides. I thought it was hilarious, but I also get where Ralph is coming from. Uh, and so I was like, no, Ralph, listen, man, we're gonna totally rehabilitate Machine Man. He's gonna become a hero again, and everyone's gonna forget about Next Wave. I don't know if everybody forgot about Next Wave, but I was telling the truth, and it did kind of work. People really dug it. So
Did you have a lot of oversight? I want to transition to your novel because that recently came out. At time of recording, it came
Bloodshot,
out 9 days ago for Bloodshot, um, which is over your shoulder.
it is
You can
poster
see
for my
the
over
viewer
both
in the
shoulders. In
background.
fact,
Yeah, that's true. So did you have a lot of constraints when it came to what you could write in your novel, or did you get kind of free reign to be able to create what you wanted the way you wanted it?
pretty much the latter. I mean, I whenever I'm taking over any established character, whether it's in comics or novels, I always try to read everything from that character, so to get really distill the essence right of the character. And so the only real constraint was that this was a brand new um Bloodshot. This was going to be something that was brand new, not tied to any continuity. Um, and so I read a bunch of stuff, and I just thought that there were aspects of the 2012 revival that I really liked that I thought never really um, the gang. I mean, most of those launch books were pretty terrific, but and there was a lot in Bloodshot that was terrific, but I feel like it never quite reached its full potential. And so I just kind of went back and said, well, what if the Psyot, the Harbinger hunting thing was forefront from the very beginning, and kind of take it from there. So that's kind of what I ended up doing. The only thing that they said that I wasn't allowed to do, which I was a little disappointed with, in a couple of places, but it ended up not being a big deal. Was they refused to let any of these, because it's not the only Valiant novel. Like Eternal Warriors coming out next. I'm actually reading it right now. It's terrific. Um, uh, they weren't allowed to cross over with each other, the novels. So
Ah,
at
interesting.
one point, I thought there was a nice potential crossover, but they next time.
And when does that release? Do you know?
I don't know. I
Oh,
have an
gotcha.
advanced reader copy. I'm blurbing it for the jacket, so this is
Gotcha.
not gone to the printer yet.
The benefits of being an established and well-respected creator and
Well, and
you
the
know,
guy who wrote the first novel in the series. I
yeah.
mean,
True.
primary
So
motive.
are they is there plans for it to cross over later, or are these all just set to be in their own
No idea.
company? So how did you come up with the general plot to set it up for the reader? I'm in the middle of reading it. I didn't get the chance to finish it before we had our conversation, but uh, this is a retelling of Bloodshot as a teenager and
Right.
still as a weapon for Project Rising Spirit and still as a Psyod Hunter, the boogeyman. Um, how did you come up with that general plot? Was there something that inspired you to make him a teenager? Like that specifically is to me the biggest subversion of his
Yeah.
story.
Well,
What was the inciting incident for that?
full disclosure, the Blackstone, the publisher, and Valiant in general wanted me to go with a YA approach, like a lot of the other prose novels you see coming out of like Marvel and DC. And then they decided, no, we don't want. After I turned the book in, they're like, nah, we wanted to just kind of publish everybody. I'm like, well, hope
I
people like Teen Bloodshot.
I will say I at reading it, I do understand that like yeah, Bloodshot as a teenager definitely is like a YA move.
Right.
But it doesn't read. One of my biggest complaints with young adult novels, and for the most part, people who exclusively read it, is that it's written for teenagers, not an adult level of thinking. But one of the things I really love about it, and what I love about your writing in general, having also read 10 Dead Comedians this past week, which
There you
I
go.
figured you would be happy to know, and I have a couple
Fantastic.
questions
Also
about.
over my shoulder, that one above
Uh,
the shot, if you can see it. That's
Such a
very
fantastic book. Loved it. Um,
good.
it doesn't feel dumbed down. It does feel like it's written with adult critical thinking in
It's
mind.
written for
It's
smart
not
people.
flowery, it's not Shakespearean by any means in terms of language, but it is written normally, I should say.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel dumbed down. And I do really respect that approach. And it's really interesting because you wrote it as a young adult novel essentially, but it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the major characters are teenagers, but that's there's plenty of adult
Yeah, I mean, Miles
stuff
Morales is one of the
about
best-selling
children.
comic books, and he's a teenager, so who really,
That's
yeah,
yeah,
who
exactly.
cares?
But the other I think decision I made early on that helps with that is the fact that I decided the book would be from Bloodshot's point of view entirely. So it's first person. And because he's Bloodshot, he has amnesia and can't remember who he is. I decided
Staple of the character.
yeah, I decided it should be written in the first person present tense. Most novels, as anyone who's written a novel knows, are written in the past tense. But I figured this guy doesn't have a past. Everything is happening to him in real time. So I thought it'd be A, more exciting, and B, help you get more in his head if uh, you would if it was just in the present tense and it was in his voice the whole time. Now you say you're halfway through the book. Did the big thing happen yet? That happens halfway through the
No, I am
book?
25% of the way through the book.
Okay, fair enough.
I
Fair
had
enough.
to travel for work this week. I didn't have a lot of time,
It's
but
fine.
I am actually at the fight between actually Bloodshot is just ate goat feed and is in the bun
Gotcha. So he
and
fights.
chasing
I
after
think
it.
it's a
Yes.
huge spoiler. Generation Zero appears in the book, which is a character
Yes.
that I read because I obviously, I'm super familiar with those characters. So that was super
Yeah.
fun, easy to write because I'd done the comic book about them. Because yeah, he's a Syat hunter, and particularly of teen Syats, and he appears to be a teenager because most of the Syats he hunts are teenagers,
He's
and
got to fit in.
he's got to fit
He's got
in.
to, yeah.
So it just seemed to make perfect sense to me. I mean, it was a little daunting at first to be like they were all, like, because obviously if you're dealing with the YA space, they do get, like, for obvious reasons, and it does come up in the book, about school shootings and about teens wielding guns, but it's Bloodshot. He's got to have a gun at some
Yeah,
point.
he's got a
Or
Beretta and he
way it
stashes
is.
it in a trash can on his way into a school. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So,
As a guy who's quote unquote, almost direct quote from the book, most likely to come back and shoot up the school.
yes, he chooses the wrong. As many Bloodshot fans know, says he has minor shape shifting abilities because the nanites can scramble his appearance. Yeah, he makes the wrong decision of which kid to impersonate as he walks into the school,
Because he saw a photograph
he
in
saw a
Kalia's
photograph,
phone. And
and oops, he
yeah,
ended up drawing way more attention to himself than he really wanted to.
yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Speaking of that interaction, so two things regarding it. Mason Miller. Now, I don't know if you intended this, but did you purposely, I know you're a baseball fan, you're a Mets fan. Did you purposely reference the star rookie from the Oakland Athletics when you named him that?
no, is his name Mason Miller? I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's
And he
funny.
was like a strikeout king. He was
Is
great
that
last year.
super recent?
Yeah, it was this past season,
And
so
he's a
I thought
pitcher.
maybe it was yeah, but I
Gosh,
thought maybe it was recent enough that, or like long ago that you could put it in there while you were writing it, but yeah, books take a while to come out,
yeah,
so
no,
it's
I
not like you were
totally missed
writing
that.
it
And
last
Mason
week.
Mason Miller is a name that I came up with in college for it. It was a title character of a short story I wrote for a class. So no, it's a total. I just like the name amuses me because it's two like jobs involving rocks.
Interesting. Yeah,
That's
didn't think about
that's
that.
that's that's his name. And what's funny is I turned the novel in 2023. So if this kid didn't even premiere
Yeah, I
until
did.
before the
He
paper, I
was
have
in the
no
minors. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yes.
would have no idea. That's funny. No, I no clue.
Okay, well,
So
that's interesting because like you are a baseball fan. I know
a
you
huge
follow
baseball fan.
baseball
Yeah.
fans. So
But the Sacramento Athletics are sadly obscure enough
yeah.
that
Yeah.
even hardcore baseball fans like who?
That's true. That is true. I only know him not because I'm pay attention to the athletics, but because he was in MLB The Show and he was like a really good
Oh, there you
rookie.
go.
That was the
There.
only reason I really know who he was. But there also is a Joshua Dysart reference. You name like the guidance counselor
I did.
after Joshua Dysart. Now, he famously, for the viewers at home who aren't aware, he famously wrote Harbinger and wrote those characters
Yeah.
so well that people on the Valiant subreddit literally do not want anybody to write them except for him.
I don't blame him. That
He did
Josh
such a fantastic job.
Josh's run is my favorite Valiant series by
Yeah,
far.
he fantastic stuff. But it is interesting that you reference him. I feel like that is necessary to a certain extent
Right.
because I imagine that you are very good friends with him.
I
Uh,
am.
but also, did you tell him you were putting him in the book?
I did, but only after the fact. And I sent him the book, and I haven't received a response yet. Hopefully, he's not playing. Hopefully, he's not calling lawyers right now. Yeah,
I doubt he is. He's his character is a very concerned and
yes,
normal and respectable
responsible.
person.
Everything
Yeah.
Josh Dysart is not. So
Yeah. I wouldn't know. I've never met the guy or spoken to him, but I'll take your word for it as somebody who knows him more than me.
I'm sort of kidding. Sort of kidding.
So your approach to writing a novel obviously is very different than writing a script for a comic because obviously you're writing in prose. It's not like you are paneling out things, but also your outlines probably look fairly similar. But how do they differ? What does that look like? What's the process look like? Writing a novel versus writing a comic, does your brain have to work differently, or are you still kind of
But yeah.
picturing panels in your head?
Well, when I was writing 10 Dead Comedians, which was my first published prose novel, I'd written a bunch that are gathering dust in a drawer somewhere. Um, I I really had to like unlearn a lot of stuff that I picked up from decades of doing comic scripting because basically, I mean, the simplest way to think about this is the difference between a comic book scripter and a prose novelist is the difference between an architect and a house builder. An architect is creating a plan for other people to then build the thing, but house builders do build the house, like the whole thing. Like he's got to come up with the whole thing by himself. So, uh, and I try not to over describe things in my scripts to give my artists artistic freedom. Uh, but in prose, you're a one man band. You have to be as precise and descriptive as possible so that the reader understands the scene. So that was a challenge to get used to at first. But I this is the fourth one, so I think I finally
Yeah, yeah. So
like
you've
I
written.
got it. I got a handle on it.
So I know so I from my mind it was three because you have 10 Dead Comedians, which
Right.
I loved. It was fantastic. You have Never Sleep, which is next up
Yes.
on my to read, and then you have Bloodshot. That's what I'm aware of. What's the fourth one?
The fourth one is called The Con Artist. It came out not long after Tended Comedians. It's another mystery novel. It's a murder mystery set at San Diego Comic Con about a comics
Oh,
penciler who's basically accused of murdering his editor.
very interesting. So that also has to be added to the list.
Yeah, so he's to solve the crime.
So in 10 Dead Comedians, you have 10 comedians lured to, or not really 10, but a bunch of comedians lured to a island. The 10th dead comedian would be Dustin Walker, who
The
wasn't
first
lured to the
victim,
island.
sure, fair
Well,
enough.
yeah, 10th meaning there's a group of 9 total, and then there's Dustin Walker.
Gotcha. One of them is already at the island when they show up.
Yes,
Crazy
yes.
100%. Okay, fair
So
enough.
you have these comedians. Who were the inspirations for some of them? So you have like a Joe Rogan-y type, but he's in TJ Martinez. Uh you have
Hiroga was not a thing when I wrote that book, really. So
well, it came out in 2017.
right. I mean,
Joe
he's more
Rogan's
than
been around for a while, but I guess not.
yes, yes. I love news
He's
radio.
changed a lot over the years, to be fair. But who were the analogs you used? I think I like my brain can kind of pick
Yeah.
up on who like is Dustin Walker like Drew Carey? Is he like who? Yeah, what's your analog for these people?
So Dustin Walker is this sort of reclusive superstar. So there's like a lot of like later Eddie Murphy in there, and a lot of like Robin Williams. I mean, they're all like just I think close enough to be familiar, but obviously, you have to make some stuff up to make the plot work. Otherwise,
And
it's
to clarify,
the
any
billiard
analog
balls
for
bouncing
like
all.
TJ Martinez who like sexually assaults women is like not an
Right.
allegation against whoever inspired his
That's right.
character in
Well,
the strip.
technically, it was inspired by Louis C.K., so I don't know if you necessarily
That okay,
say that,
that's
but
true. But also
but
like
I see where you're
fuck
coming from.
Louis CK, who cares? Like
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was, and what's funny is that it's not funny, but that was kind of an open knowledge in the comedy community before that kind of came out. So that my book actually came out before he got outed and canceled.
yeah.
Uh, but TJ Martinez is sort of this kind of he's like a Jay Leno. He's a late night talk show host, right? But he
Yeah.
has UCK proclivities.
And then you have Ollie who is Carrot Top, basically.
Carrot Top plus Blue Man Group. My
And then
wife
you have
is a playwright, and so there's a bit like where you go into the Ollie's like handbook, and
yeah.
I
Mhm.
read the Blue Man Group handbook because my wife it was a playwright, was auditioning basically to get the gig to write for Blue Man Group. So I had all the internal Blue Man Group memos, and so that's where that all comes from. So it was amusing.
That's pretty awesome. Technical Comedians I was one of my favorite reads so far of the year. I've actually read like 6 books this year so far.
Oh wow,
So um
we're four
I
weeks
very
in. I'm
much
impressed. You're doing better than I.
I try my best. I I really enjoyed reading it because it did feel fresh. I think one of the things murder mystery books fall into is the trap of being so set on copying everything that happened before it.
Well,
And
it's like the McDonald's menu. You don't go into
yeah,
McDonald's wanting to be surprised
yeah.
or the experiment.
But you made it fresh enough that it didn't feel like I was in McDonald's. If
Good.
that makes sense. Like you had this interesting concept. The story itself was very interesting and intriguing. I did not guess the twist at all
Good.
until it happened. I won't reveal it here because I actually want to
Nope.
I want to like I want to encourage my viewers and my followers who are predominantly comics readers to like go read a novel, go read this book. Like you have a professional comic artist who's also writing books, who's advocating for reading novels. Like it's important. Your brain grows by doing that. And like there's so much cool stuff out there uh, that I want to encourage them to do that because I'm a big proponent for that. I read a lot as it is. What does the process look like for using an editor for a novel versus a comic book? Is there overlap? Are they two kind of similar in name only sort of analogs? Like, what does that look like for the process of writing either one?
It's a broad question. These days, and I don't mean this as like a humble brag. In fact, in many ways, I find it kind of disappointing. I'm not really edited. I have to self-edit. A lot of it is simply the 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 reality is that there are way less editors, so the amount of attention they can give to any one manuscript or project is pretty minimal. So I think generally the idea is to, Bloodshot was a a licensed book, right? So I was a hired hand, like I was hired to do this. I put as much energy into it as I would have put into any one of my other novels. But still, like their job basically is to make sure you stay, you color within the lines and you don't, they're there to sort of represent the licensor to a certain degree. Although the licensor does get to read the sign off on the book. So in that sense, it's actually exactly the same. Um, I think that in prose, it's a little different because, again, because you're a one man band, a line editor or a copy editor is going to go through and say, "What did you mean by this? I don't understand this sentence," that kind of stuff. While in comics, a lot of that gets worked out in the lettering pass or in the art pass. So it's a different situation. But I'd say overall, it's pretty much exactly the same.
I mean, someone's telling you what they like and don't like about it and what
Yeah,
they think will work. So,
exactly.
yeah, that definitely seems similar. So, uh, we're running out of time. We're coming to a close. So, I want to hit you with some rapid fire questions, and I want to urge you to don't think, just say whatever your first inclination is. I want you to say it. So, first and foremost, what is your dream character to write?
Mr. Miracle.
Mr. Miracle, which is fantastic book, fantastic character. That's a great answer. I didn't expect that actually. I thought you'd pick more of like not that Mr. Miracle is necessarily super popular these days. He's a little more popular than he has been in the past couple decades, but I thought you'd pick more of like a C or D lister. I thought you'd pick someone a little like Stingray or something, you know?
Yeah. I don't I think Mr. Miracle is barely B list at this point, so I'm impressed by I guess how Tom and Mitch have elevated him in the comics annals. I really
Well,
wanted.
Rom V has him in his current New Gods book,
Oh,
so
sure. Yeah, yeah,
he's
yeah.
got
And
even more of a spotlight.
John Byrne when he did his New Gods comic. Yeah, I just think it would be fun to do a Mr. Miracle series set entirely when he was a kid in on Apocalypse. Like that's the Mr. Miracle I want to do.
That would be a fantastic. I would love I will personally write to DC
I
with
like it.
whatever minimal cachet I have, and I will ask on your
I also
behalf.
have a demon. Like I just would love to do any of the DC Kirby characters, like Demon or Challenges the Unknown or
Gotcha.
something.
All right, this might be a little bit of a trick question. Who wins, Adam Warlock or Divinity?
Divinity. He's way more powerful.
Okay, so Dr. Manhattan or Divinity?
Um, Probably Divinity because Divinity's powers, Doctor Manhattan's powers can be semi explained by science, and Divinity's powers are kind of more cosmic and mystical. I don't.
Very
I mean,
true.
to find someone to beat up Divinity, you would have to pull in like the in betweener or one of the
That's true. The one
Marvel.
above all.
Yeah, exactly. One of the real super cosmic characters.
Gotcha.
Um,
Who do you prefer, Spider-Man or Deadpool, and why?
well, Spider Man was my favorite superhero growing up, so that's super easy. I enjoyed it. I've written a lot of Deadpool comics. I've written more Spider Man comics than I've written Deadpool comics. Although I was just checking out the other day Deadpool versus Punisher, which is still amuses me. Uh, Spider Man is, I think, a very relatable person, while Deadpool is basically Bugs Bunny with guns. Um, and I just think they kind of are too. I I, I like Spider-Man so much, so I'm not necessarily a huge fan of permanently pairing with someone who is even more obnoxious than he is. I
Fair
think that's
enough. That's a great answer. Favorite comic artist of all time?
like Burn. I loved Alpha Flight so much as a kid. I just love those clean lines, just the clean lines, and he really understands formalism, and he's just kind of good at everything when it comes to comics. I mean, um, it's just re-looking at some of his the Marvel team up stuff that he did with Claremont before they did X-Men together. Because I'm doing a column about team up books. I did this column for 13th Dimension, um, which is a great retro website my buddy Dan Greenfield runs. Um, Probably Burn. Like I end up sending artists I'm working with to Burn comics more often than not. I'm just doing this graphic novel, and the guy nailed it. There was this terrific issue of Fantastic Four during Secret Wars when three of the four were off on Battle World. It's from the Trapster's point of view as he's trying to break into the Baxter building, and the whole thing is told from the Trapsters through the Trapsters' eyes, and it's just really well done. And so I wanted a sequence like that in a comic I'm doing that's coming out real soon. And so I sent the artist that issue, and he just nailed it. Like actually, it's almost it's amazing because that sequence looks better than anything else in the comic.
That's awesome.
They should send more comics to the other comic.
That's awesome. Awesome. Fred, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. You have Murder Kingdom out. The third issue
Yep.
comes out soon.
Came
Please
out.
go read Murder Kingdom, people. It's so good.
Thank you. It came out actually yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. So
Two
please
months
go
late.
pick up Murder Kingdom and finish Resurgence. If you haven't picked up Resurgence, like go read
Yes,
Resurgence,
Resurgence is
people.
out. It's done. It's great.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
One, bitches in the upper tier, versatile temperature.